Alan Spencer. Welcome to my studio. Glad you're checking out this video, and I have a topic that I have noticed gets pretty neglected in the music world. I've had other videos that I've produced and made for you guys that get into how to practice, mainly what you do during your time, like you have your lesson once a week for a half hour or an hour or whatever, and then all the other 96%, 97% of your time that you're not in your lesson or you're not performing a show, you're practicing. What are you doing during that practice time? That's where most of your effort is going into. That's where most of your time is going into. And if you're not taught how to practice, you're holding your what do you call it? What do they say? You're cutting yourself short. And so that video you can watch if you want to see. This one is on the musical roadmap, which is what I call it. I've heard a handful of people call it this as well. It might be called something different in other places, but that's what I call it. And if you, this can be considered how to practice, but it's also it's a mixture of how to play a song, also just how to jump in. What I've noticed is most people, when they see a piece of music, whether they're looking at it for the first time or it's a piece that they're familiar with, a lot of people will open it up and they just kind of go. And it is critical that you know your musical roadmap before you start a piece of music. I'm going to speak to you right now, as a music teacher speaking to a student, but you could just very well be a player as well, and you could be a teacher. And this is something you might want to implement into your lessons. And it's something that I hit home pretty hard a lot with my students. They say, don't even start playing a note until you cover the roadmap first. And it's annoying, it takes an extra minute and a half, to look over everything and make sure you have all the details that you need before you start. But the best example of describing this problem is that playing a piece of music is, I know it's cliche to say, but it's like going on a journey. And not reading a musical roadmap is as dangerous as being dropped in some country you've never been in before, or dropped in the middle of a forest and told to find civilization, and you have no map. You're just saying a prayer, taking a couple steps forward and hoping for the best. Not going to work out very well. In that case, being dropped in the forest. Similarly, in a piece of music, right? If you start at the beginning and you just go, assuming you're not doing like a sight reading assignment, and even if you are doing a sight reading assignment, you should still be doing the stuff that I have listed here. So anyway, like I was saying, you're going on a journey or you're in the middle of the forest, and you need to have some pretty critical elements. You need to know some really important stuff before you start walking around. Same thing with a piece of music. Now, this is my daughter's, but this is basically what I cover with all of my students. And I'll give you the bullet points first, and then we'll talk about each one. So the first bullet point is something that I call calibration, and the second one is tempo, third one is dynamics, fourth one is articulations, fifth one is rhythm, sixth one is notation, and then the last one is kind of a miscellaneous cornucopia of a bunch of other things that tend to show up when you're playing a piece of music. And so before you ever start a piece of music, let's assume you're sight reading. We'll start with there. When you're sight reading, you should not be just looking at measure one, jumping in and going. When you're sight reading, you should be taking at least 20, 30 seconds, depending on how long the piece is. If it's a very long piece, you're going to need more time. But, in a 2-3 minute piece, you'll need about 30 seconds, maybe a minute, to go over all of these critical elements. Just kind of like an inventory, a reconnaissance of all the stuff that you're going to be trudging through in the next couple minutes. If it's a piece that you already know, then, or that you're somewhat familiar with, you can do kind of a quick reminder. Like the roadmap is just boom, 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 boom. Okay, yeah, I'm in this key. And, here's the tempo. Here's some of the articulative stuff that I need to know about, and all that. Just give yourself a quick reminder. And if it's a piece that you have memorized, like something you're playing for a recital, you don't really need to go over the roadmap anymore because you are the map, right? You have traversed this journey enough times now that it's very much like if someone comes from out of town to visit your house and they need to go somewhere in town nearby, go to the store or whatever, you're the map because you're familiar with everything around your house. So that's what it's like. Ultimately, when you memorize a piece, you're now the shaman. You're the pilot of this, of this aircraft that you're taking everyone else on this journey for them. Okay, so when in my lessons, for every piece of music that we would learn, some of my students, I'd drive them crazy because I'd make them do this every time. And I'd say, okay, open up to this page and play this for me. And they'd open it up and they'd start playing. I'm like, nope, I didn't see you go through the roadmap. And they're like, well, okay, and they go through all this stuff. And wouldn't you know it, they always play it better, when they do this little quick roadmap review. Very, very important. So number one is calibration. And as you guys know this, if you're not looking at the key signature or you're not looking at the time signature, you might as well close up the piano and walk away. And I'm talking about piano right now, but this is for any instrument, right? You have to know these essential details. So, not looking at the key signature is the same as walking around Chicago with a map of New York. You're a disaster, a catastrophe on the piano whenever you're playing. If you don't know the key signature, or if you didn't look, or the piece you were playing before was in the key of D, and now you're in the key of G flat or something, and you don't spend a little bit of time kind of letting that sit in, you're going to go through this period of 4 or 5 measures of wrong notes that shouldn't be there. So that's key signature, and of course the time signature. If you don't look at the time signature, or you don't have a very good grasp on what the meter is or the general feel of the song, why play it? So so on here you'll see, and I'll have this posted, of course, showing up right here or something like that. What key signature, what key is the song in, and I always ask the students, okay, do you know the scale that matches that key? Because that's how you're calibrating your hands to the instrument. And then time signature, how are the measures divided? Are they divided into 4s, 3s, whatever? And what's the general feel? And so that's number one, that's calibration. That's high priority. Okay, number 2 is tempo, of course. If you're reading a piece for the first time, or if you're not very familiar with it, of course you're going to be playing it at a much slower tempo than what's written or what's assigned. But you should know what it's supposed to sound like. You should know, generally speaking, how fast or slow it's supposed to be. And then, of course, going through this roadmap, little by little, more and more every time they do it, they're going to start identifying the names of tempos in all these different languages, like presto or allegro or largo or whatever. Number 3, dynamics. And of course, you got to know what they are, forte, mezzo, forte, yada, 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 but look over the whole piece. I'm not saying you're going to catch everything the first time you play it, or even the first couple times you play it, but again, you should know generally what's happening. If it goes to a different section, is it supposed to be louder or softer, right? And at least know what it's supposed to be before you start playing, even if you don't catch all of it. Number 4 is articulations. Now, I've noticed in all of the, when I used to conduct orchestra, or, I would take groups for competitions and stuff, the things that would score the most points in competition, and this isn't always true, but I would just sort of generally notice this, that the things that would score the most points are balance and articulation. So I'll start with balance, since balance isn't on this list, because at least with piano, the only balancing you really ever doing is between 2 hands. But anyway, balance is very important, because you could be conducting an orchestra and your flute section might sound flawless, but if they're being covered by the rest of the ensemble on stage, what's the point? So if the rest of the ensemble is playing still at a forte level when before they were supposed to be playing, or when now they're supposed to be playing a pianissimo and they're not, then the flutes might be playing marvelously and it doesn't matter. No one can hear it. So the balance is one of them. Anyway, the point is, the second one is articulation. Articulation is how clear are you delivering the information. You might be playing the right notes, and you might be playing the right rhythms, but it's not you're not expressing what the music is supposed to sound like. So, for example, if you take, okay, that's all the right notes, that's all the right rhythm, but it's not this. Okay, so articulation makes all the difference, definitely when it comes to points, scoring points at a competition. But even if you're not at a competition, I mean, you hear the difference. This is the non-articulate, and then the articulate. And I'm not even sure that's what the articulations that are in the actual piece, but I'm just giving an example. Articulation is very important. Staccato, legato, accents, things like that. So the player, before they start the piece, when they're going down the list, figure out, okay, is there a passage that's supposed to be, and not, so when they get there, they know at least that they're playing it incorrectly if they're just surviving it in sight reading or something. And then they'll know when they go back, and they're reviewing it more and they're practicing it more. Okay, they've kind of made a mental inventory of that section because the articulation needs to be clarified. It's bland, it's kind of a lower level beginner style, amateur style to play bland music when it could be clarified, it could be expressed and delivered better. Am I delivering the information the way that it's written, the way that it was intended to be by the composer? Okay, so number 5 is rhythm. Now, most people when they play, in their minds, they're stressing out of their gourd because they want to hit all the right notes, which is true. You do want to hit all of the right notes. But they usually focus on the rhythm later. I put rhythm before notation on this. So when you're scanning the piece of music and looking at the roadmap in general, it's much more important to understand the rhythm than it is the notes, which you would expect to hear from a drummer and not from a pianist, which, by the way, I am a drummer, but when it comes to a melodic instrument, or mostly melodic instrument, most people spend a whole lot of effort worried about the notes, and you forget that the right note at the wrong time is the wrong note, and the wrong note at the right time is still the wrong note. But people think, well, I played the right note, so at least I'm sort of there, and you're not. The right note at the wrong time is the wrong note. In fact, if you play the wrong note, but you're playing it at the right time, at least in an ensemble setting, if you're thinking of a big orchestra, and if I'm playing marimba in an orchestra, and I play the wrong note, this is, some seasoned musicians are going to cringe when they hear this, but yes, if you're playing the wrong note at the right time, you can at least hope it's going to get lost in the soup of sound on stage by the time it's delivered to the listener. So if you had to pick one of the two, would you play the right note or the wrong note, depending on whether it's in time or not? And most people would say, well, I'd rather play the wrong note but in time, because if you play the right note and you're a half beat ahead or a half beat behind, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. You're going to not only add to the stress that you're already dealing with playing on stage and having people watching you, but you're going to irritate everyone around you. So rhythm, very, very important. So I put on here on the list, at least rhythmically, do you see repetitive patterns that are going to make your life easier as you're trying to read through this thing? Do you see any other advanced figures that you need to break down right now before you start playing? If you see a bunch of eighths and sixteenths and all kinds of not unusual, but combinations that you don't see all the time, So that's rhythm. Then we have notation. Notation, I would say, is less priority than rhythm when you're actually playing a piece and when you're reviewing, your recon mission roadmap. The notes will come later. It's the perpetual feeling of the rhythm and the pulse that needs to be more. You have to dedicate more of your attention to. So here we are. We're on notation now. So of course, what are the notes, right? What are the positions of the notes on the page? What are their names? This is more for beginners. And then when you start to look at the roadmap and just start noticing, do you see more notes moving in steps, or are they moving in skips? Because then that'll tell you if it's scalar motion or if it's arpeggiation. Most of you out there know, after you've played for a long time, that, oh jeez, I don't know, especially if you're talking about 18th, 19th century music, a little bit of 20th century music, I don't know what, 90% of it or so is mostly chords, arpeggios, scale or motion type stuff, where you can see at the beginning of the measure, by the time you're getting to the end of the measure, am I going to be playing a scalar like figure here, or is it more of an arpeggio, yada yada. These are patterns that the more and more you do it, you're going to pick up on it, and you're going to find that as you're playing through stuff, your hands just kind of go where they belong, just based on these patterns. So I don't mean when I say use your roadmap to start this piece, that you go and you look through it every single note all the way from beginning to end. Just kind of in a general sense, on a grand scale, kind of notice these patterns. And up in the higher level stuff, when you get really familiar, start looking at the chord progressions, right? And the orbits, like the fact that chords like to go down a fifth, do you see all these? And again, in most of, gold standard formal classical education, you're going to see all of these predictable chord progression patterns. And the faster you can pick up on those, the easier your life will be when you're trying to play through something. Okay, so then in the very last bullet point on here in your roadmap is kind of the miscellaneous pile, all the other things that sort of show up occasionally enough, right? Repeat signs, first and second endings, DCs and DSs and pedal markings, and what else do I have on here? A double bar with a tempo change, or a double bar with a key change. You want to know these things before you start jumping in, even if you've played it before. So you just kind of have to give yourself a quick review. And so, for example, I'm playing a piece, I open it up, I'm just going to pull this out here. To do this correctly, I have a piece of music here, it's 4 pages long. I'm not going to play it right now, but I'm looking at it. Okay, I'm going through my roadmap. So we have key signature, boom, B minor, all right. Time signature, 4/4, easy enough. Tempo is about 110, 120 in that area. Dynamics, most of the time it's mezzo forte, gets a little louder here, it goes down to mezzo piano here. Okay, I got the general feel. There's a couple crescendos and decrescendos in here. And I guess one thing I should have put on here, which you could put it in the miscellaneous pile, is the form. That's for more of the kind of standardized classical music. There's going to be these big sections, right? And each of those sections have predictable spots with the key changes, or you can see melodies, or themes and stuff here and there. So the form would probably be in the miscellaneous pile. But anyway, so articulations, okay, got some, I'm just kind of scanning, noticing. All right, just a couple of them here. There's a couple legatos, a couple staccatos. And now we have rhythm. So I'm scanning across. I don't see anything really that sticks out. I have a lot of repetitive eighth notes here. There's a couple places that have, like an anticipated offbeat thing, so I have, okay. And then we have notation. So I'm looking at the notation. I'm seeing mostly, it starts off just kind of with chords, even if I'm not getting all the notes right. Okay, I'm seeing the patterns of inversions, first inversion, second inversions. This is B minor, so it's harmonic minor, so I'm seeing an A sharp often. Okay, I'm just noticing these things. I see some scalar motion most of the time. A couple times it moves in steps, arpeggiating. There's a couple places where there's octaves. Yeah, I'm just scanning. So far, and I'm talking through this right now. It goes a little faster if you're not talking through it. But so far, we've dedicated about a minute to this, to get to that whole list. Any other important information? There's no repeats. There's no DCs, no DSs. There is an 8 VA up an octave right there. There's a place where a clef changes, and no tempo changes. And we're in business and we're ready to play. So it seems kind of, I guess, annoying, when you're starting, when you're going to start playing a piece, to make yourself go through this roadmap. And I'm guilty of it too. If there's a piece that I don't know well enough, like by memory, I'll open it up and I'll just start playing, and I'll kind of catch mistakes here and there, or I'll notice that I fall apart in some places, and that probably wouldn't have happened if I would have taken just a little extra minute or two before I started. The roadmap is very, very important. You would not go, traveling in some other country and, go to some tourist attraction with someone who's your guide and have them, not know their way around, or, even if you didn't have a guide, smart people don't go to a place that they're unfamiliar with and just start walking around and hoping for the best. It's not going to work. At least if it does, then you got lucky. And I don't play music based on luck. I want to play music to make it sound right, to make people enjoy it, and that's how it's done. The roadmap, very important. Very important part of playing. So I actually, in my lessons, I have students practice going through the roadmap, and you only do that 4 or 5 times, and you hope to develop that routine. You hope to kind of develop that good habit as you're progressing through your musical career, your musical life. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope that was helpful. I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.